The blank I'll be turning today was sent to me all the way from Australia by a very good friend of mine named Tommy Stridham. Now Tommy cast this blank and sent it to me, and right after I received it, you can tell there's my black line. I went ahead and measured it off. I drilled it, I tubed it, and I prepped it to be turned, but I just never got around to turning it. And it's been on my maker cart ever since, and it's been on my to-turn list ever since. And today we're going to turn this. Now, I have looked for the other piece of this blank. I know I have it stored away in my shop, but it says gum nuts and white, and I'm not sure if that's pine cone. I don't know what the other piece is in there. It looks like pine cone, but I know that Tommy watches the videos, so I'm going to ask Tommy if he wouldn't mind to comment and let us know this is what this is. It is gum nuts and white what? I do apologize for that, and I did look for the other half, but I got a lot of stuff squirreled away in the shop. I've got my tool sharp, and we're ready to go ahead and start the turning process. The blank is starting to come into true, but I kept noticing that my tool was grabbing, so I stopped to take a look at it, and it's very dull. So I don't know if maybe this is a fiberglass in this resin, or if maybe these gum nuts are just that difficult to turn that they are really taking the edge off the tool. So I'm going to go ahead and run this back across the grinding wheels, put a new edge on it, then we're going to come back and continue to take this blank to true. I've got the blank trued, and it is turning into a stunning blank. It's going to make a gorgeous pin. Just look at it. It's going to be beautiful once it's pressed into a kit. But it is a challenging turn in that my tool is already dull. It is just eating the cutting edge off of this tool. And I don't know if it is the gum nuts being so hard, or if it is maybe something in that resin. I'm not 100% sure, but we're going to have to sharpen again, and I think we're going to have to sharpen often to make it through the turning of this blank. This is truly a challenging turn, and I think I've come to the conclusion the resin cuts nicely. I don't believe it's the resin that is dulling the tool. I believe it's these gum nuts. I think they are literally just that hard that they are just wearing the edge off of the tool. However, if I can keep this blank together till the very end, it's going to make a gorgeous pin. You can see there are a few voids, you know, because of the gum nuts, but we can fill those with CA. That shouldn't be an issue. I still have 3/8 of an inch on either end that I need to take this down, and I'm super nervous because take a look at this. This gum nut right here goes all the way down and it looks like it touches the bushing. So I'm nervous that I'm going to turn this all the way down, and when we get to the end, we're going to blow that out and we're going to lose our blank. And I really don't want to lose this one. I would love to keep it together. The blues are just brilliant, and it's going to be a gorgeous blank. We're going to sharpen once again, and then I'm going to get back to turning. Well, I'm not happy. This one was, I tell you what, I'm sweating like crazy from my brow turning this one because I was so nervous. I literally left my grinder running. I would take one, maybe two passes, then I would go to the grinder and I would sharpen the tool. And I just kept being so careful. And finally, it went. And I'm close. I still have maybe 1/8 of an inch and probably had 1/8 of an inch on this bushing before I was finished. And this one, it was just so hard to turn because those gum nuts are just so tough. I am super disappointed that I lost the end of this blank. And my mind is racing right now with, what can I do to fix it? And I think what I'm gonna do is I think I'm gonna start the lathe back up and continue turning. The objective is to get this end of the blank down to the tube. And then we'll just take a little meat off as we go this way in hopes of not taking any more material off of the blank just yet. But let's see if we can clean this up, to about here and just make it nice. I've got the blank turned down to the bushings at the far end. A little bit of sanding, it will be a perfect match. And you can see, if you kind of look, the blank sort of flares out right about here because I stopped turning when I got close to this because I didn't want to catch and tear any more off. What we're going to do is we're going to take our parting tool and we're going to part this off as close to this as we can. Make a nice square edge, nice flat edge. We'll locate another piece of wood that looks good with this blank and we will drill it out and attach it. And once it dries, we'll turn it down to this diameter. The next thing we'll do is, after we get this peeled off, everywhere there's a divot, you can see inside of these little nuts, there's little divots because the resin couldn't get in there. I'm gonna go ahead and fill those with CA. We're gonna clean them first thoroughly, then we're gonna fill them with CA. As we get this turned down to where it's level, we'll make 1 or 2 final cleansing passes just to level the whole blank, not really worrying about cutting. We're just going to be taking the CA bubbles off of the blank. Then we should be able to sand and finish this blank. And I still think it's going to look beautiful. I'm super disappointed in myself, but I knew that was a possibility with the difficulty I was having with turning this blank. I'm going to start by making a black mark here. And the reason why is when this thing gets spinning, it's kind of tough to see where this ends, but that black mark, you can kind of see it right there. And that's going to let me know where I need to turn back to with my parting tool. Not bad. We will scuff this up with a little sandpaper to take any of the remaining glue off of it. And I think I'll do that on the lathe. We've got a nice square edge here. Actually, I think I will clean that up just a hair. It looks like it may go in at an angle. I want to make sure that it goes in straight. So let's go ahead, put it back on the lathe. We'll hit it one more time with the parting tool just to make sure that we've got a nice square edge so we get a good mating surface. And then I'll take a little sandpaper and scuff that up, and we'll be ready to glue a blank on here once we identify which one we want to use. I believe this end of the blank is now ready to have some additional material glued to it. What we're going to do is, before we identify what that's going to be, prep it and glue it, we're going to pause, we're going to clean this blank really well, and we're going to fill all these little divots with CA. And you'll notice there's one right there, and it looks kind of white. That's because it's full of dust. We're going to focus on cleaning those out and then letting them dry, and then we'll fill them with CA, a medium CA. We're going to avoid activator. We're going to try to let it dry naturally, and we should be able to shave that off, and you'll never even know that divot or blemish was in the blank. I'm using denatured alcohol, and I'm really just going to douse and scrub this blank as best as I can. She's drying pretty quickly because the DNA just doesn't stay on the blank. I'm going to go ahead and wait a couple of minutes. Then we're going to check each of these divots and make sure they are good and clean. The denatured alcohol is dried, and I just brought my medium CA over, and we're just going to put a dot at each location where we have a divot. Get rid of that bubble. Try not to let bubbles stay in there because they will show up. Actually, you'll try to turn this off or sand it down, and it will pop that bubble, and you still have a divot in your blank. We are going to use a little activator with this. I needed to use the activator because with putting dots on here, they'll just run down the blank, and it'll just make a bigger mess. Now, if I were going to turn these off immediately, I would let it sit for about 15 minutes and dry naturally. Since I'm going to have to find wood, drill the wood out, glue it on here, let that sit, there's going to be plenty of time for that CA to finish curing. So I'm just going to search my entire blank over, looking for any possibility of a divot. I'm going to seal this entire little piece here. There's all kinds of fibrous, I don't know what you would call it, but like grain. Just want to make sure we seal everything we can see. All right, I'm pretty good with that. Let's spin it. Give it a quick shot of CA so it's nice and even. Okay, we didn't get any CA over the edge. We still got a nice sharp edge right there. This blank is going to, I'm going to go right now and look for a piece to glue onto it, and then we'll get that drilled, glued on, and we'll let this blank set and cure for as long as it needs. I think I've decided what I want to do. Now, Tommy made this blank for me in his shop in Australia, and this is a Chaos, or part of a Chaos pin blank that I made here in my shop in the US. And I think what I'm going to do is, I need about a 1/2 inch of material. I think I'm going to pick that 1/2 inch, just pick the best 1/2 inch I can of this blank, the most chaotic 1/2 inch, which is right here in the middle, and I'm going to mount that onto this tube. And we are going to turn a pin that is something from Tommy's shop and something from my shop. We're going to put it together, and we're going to have a little sort of a collaboration. So I'm really excited about doing this. I hope you like it. Let's get started. I've picked out the section of the blank that I want. I have basically made it way larger than I need, so I'm just going to freehand it on the bandsaw just to get it cut out, and we'll go from there. When I drilled this blank out, the entry hole is perfect. The exit hole had some chip out, and I think it was due to two things. Number one, I kind of cut on an angle because I freehanded it, and number two, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of wood coming together right there, and I probably should have drilled it before I cut it, but it's not an issue because if I slide it onto the blank, you can see, I don't know how well you can see from that far back, but there is quite a bit of room in there. So what we'll do is we'll take a tube, we'll stick it in the back half of the blank, put it on our sanding jig, and we'll square this blank. That way it will mate nicely with this blank. We can glue it together. Once it dries, we can square that off. We can actually cut it with the bandsaw to get rid of the thick excess. Then we can square the rest of it off on the sanding jig, and we should have a very nice fit. I think that's going to look really amazing. While I had this on the sanding jig, I not only squared it, but I went ahead and took a little bit of the material away. Oh, let's bring this over so you can see it. We've got a super nice fit all the way around the blank. Look at that. And by taking the material away, I've got less material here to deal with, and I'm still below the chip out. Right, I got lucky right to the edge of the chip out, so I'll be able to, notice how off that is because I freehanded it, I'll be able to sand this right down to the tube, put it on the lathe, finish it up, and it should, I mean, it's going to be awesome. Just look at all the different colors of wood, all the different variations, and I think this will make kind of a neat collaborative effort between Tommy and myself. My CA has had plenty of time to dry. You can see anywhere there was a little pockmark in the gum nuts or the Banksia pod, and that's what this turned out to be. I got a DM from Tommy, and he told me that that's Banksia pod. You can see that I did not put any paint on my tube. I'm a little disappointed on one hand, but on the other hand, take a look at the Banksia pod and the gum nuts. They have kind of brown and then gold in them, so kind of the blue and gold. I don't know, it's actually not too bad. So I think it's going to be all right. Got lots of CA down around my piece I glued on. It's hopefully not going to go anywhere. You can see it. I think I spoke about this in the video. I don't remember, but it kind of blew out a little bit when I drilled it, but it's all well below the level of the tube, which is perfect. And I don't see any gaps between the tube and the blank, so I'm really happy about how that turned out. I'm going to get this over to my sanding disc. We're going to square this to the tube, and I probably will go ahead and just hit these corners just to sort of hedge my bets and take them off on the sander before we bring it back to the lathe and finish turning this blank. Some days you just can't win. I went over to my disc sander, I set my tripod up, I put my camera on it, and I hit play. I turned on the dust collector, and I proceeded to square the end of my blank, which turned out beautifully. I rounded over the corners. I dusted out the inside of the tube, and I went to get the back to the camera to turn it off, to move it over to the lathe, and I never actually hit record. I hit take a photo, so I have a beautiful photo of my disc sander, but no video of me rounding this over. So it was not a difficult process. You've all seen me square blanks, same process. I just held this against the wheel, like if the wheel were right here, okay, the end of the wheel, I just had this off the end of the wheel like this, just holding it in my hand, and I just rotated it to round over the edges, and it turned out really nice. And then I ran the bottle brush down through the inside of the tube, and you can see as I rotate the tube, I've got a beautiful finish in there, so there's no debris inside of there. Let's get this back on the lathe and finish turning it. All I want to do is make a couple of quick passes along the blank just to take some of these high areas where the CA is kind of bubbled up, take them off. There's a really bad one right there. And then we're just going to take this down to the level of the bushing. I don't think we need anything else down here. It feels great against the bushing. And this side, if I just taper from the actual resin down to the bushing, I think we're going to look okay on this end of the blank because we were so close with that one. So let me grab my tool and finish this blank off. Well, as you can see, that didn't work out. I'm going to end up having to square this off again and put another piece of wood on there. That piece doesn't look too bad, and actually got a real nice fit between the two. Alright, I think what we're going to do is I'm going to come back here and clean this area up a little bit because I've got kind of a hump right there, and we'll just continue to work our way down, and I'll add another piece to the end of this, probably a solid banded piece. I'm happy with that. It's smooth all the way from end to end. I don't see any more pock marks. I think we've got all those filled. That's a shiny spot right there, but it's actually smooth and level with the surface. When we sand and put a finish on it, that'll go away. Great fit right there. All right, let's go dig out a piece of material to attach to the end of this blank and cap it off. I am back for round two. You can see my blank. I've gone ahead and squared off the edge of the chaos blank. And what I did notice, which this probably did not contribute to anything, but there was a glue line there, and all of the wood above this part of the blank was cross grain. Now, anytime you turn cross grain, had I noticed that ahead of time, I probably would have set down my roughing gouge and gone to my skew. I just didn't look closely at the blank, but the proper tool for cross grain is a skew because it makes such a nice cut, and it just handles it so much better than the roughing gouge. I just have a habit of going from start to finish with that gouge. I also noticed right here, I didn't see it earlier, there was a little pock mark, and I have filled that with some medium CA. It's not much, and as I turn this down, it'll just disappear and we won't have that pock mark. I dug through my scrap bin and I pulled this out. It is a piece of African blackwood. I liked it because there's going to be such a stark black difference, or stark black contrast to the blank. I think this is going to be awesome, so we're going to prep this block and attach it to this blank. I brought my piece of African blackwood over to the lathe, and you can see the marks on it. This actually was a blank, and I either turned a finial or part of an ink pen off of this blank, and that's where the parting tool scored the blank. And we're going to have to clean that up before we can glue it to the body of our blank. But that won't be a big deal, and I'll show you how to do that in a couple of minutes. Let's go ahead and get this into the vise. I've got a 27/64 inch bit chucked up, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a hole right down through the middle of our blank. You might have noticed the blank moved a tiny bit. I need to back off and tighten my vise up. See if this helps. I think the main reason why this blank slid in the vise is, it might be hard to see on the video, but this was the cutoff end of a blank, and it's covered in wax. So there's wax on all four corners, and I probably didn't have the best of grip in the vise with that wax on there. We've got a nice hole. Let's head over to the belt sander. Let's square this face so we can get it glued up onto our blank. I'm over at the disc sander, and in order to properly sand down the face of this African blackwood blank, we're going to employ a spare tube. We'll put the tube into the blank, slide it onto our sanding jig, and I'm not going to sand the tube. I'm going to keep the tube away from the disc because I don't want to shorten the tube. I'll be able to use it in another pin, but I'll hold the tube and I will rotate the blank into the disc. This will keep the blank square to the disc and allow me to square the face so that when I glue it to my blank, I've got a nice fit between the African Blackwood and the face of the Chaos blank. Now we'll do a quick test fit. That looks really nice. I'll bring it over so you can see it better. We've got a nice fit all the way around the blank. There's a little dent there, but that dent is actually on the maple there, and that will be below surface, so that will disappear. Looks great. Now to get it glued onto the blank, we'll come back later and cut the excess off and finish turning it. The glue has dried on our pin, and if you take a look down inside of the blank, it's kind of hard to see because it's dark, but there's about almost a ½ of an inch of material, probably this much material needs to be removed from the blank. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off on the bandsaw, and then we'll attempt to square the blank up on the disc sander. Wow, I really cut that close. You can't see any of the tube in the cutoff piece, but you can see where I nicked the tube with the bandsaw blade at the end. It kind of goes off at a bit of an angle. Notice how that angles down there? So I kind of nicked the one side. That shouldn't hurt anything. We've got some play, so I'll go ahead and square this up and clean that up, and we'll knock these corners off before taking it back to the lathe. I wanted to show you the blank right after squaring it up because you can kind of see over on the left side there how I sort of veered in on the wood, but you know I've got the blank square, and the way you can tell is I'd rotated a few times on the disc, and then when I would pull it off, you could see the brass getting shiny. If the brass looked dull, I still had a little bit of a concave area and needed to go ahead and run it on the sander a tiny bit more. You can also tell by looking at the flat surface here, you can see I'm well past, maybe an 1/8 inch past where it starts to drop off. So I know that I have that tube perfectly square, and it is ready to go to the lathe. But we're going to take it right back over to the sander, and I'm going to round these 4 corners off real quick. That looks pretty darn good. It's not perfectly round, but taking those corners off will keep me from getting a nasty catch and maybe blowing the blank apart. We're now ready to head over to the lathe. I've got my blank chucked up, and we're just going to go ahead and very carefully turn down this piece of African Blackwood. It appears that third time is a charm. I've got a really nice fit at my bushing. You can't feel any difference between the Chaos blank and the African Blackwood, nor can you feel any difference between the original cast blank and the Chaos blank. Feels wonderful at this end as well. I think we're ready to start sanding. I'm going to start off with a piece of 120 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to run through the standard pen turning grits, 240, 320, 400, and then we'll start working this down with some micromesh. Should look really nice when it's finished. Before sanding, we are going to put one thin coat of CA on this blank because this Blackwood will stain the maple really bad if we don't. We'll give this a few minutes to dry, and that will act like a sanding sealer and stop any staining of the lighter woods. The blank has been spinning for a couple of minutes, but it is completely dry. We're ready to begin sanding. While sanding, I just want to get rid of the shiny spots. Those are tool marks. And as we dull them out, that means the blank is level all the way. You can see it starting to get dull all the way across the surface. That's what we're after. I can feel one spot right in there that I'm going to work on just a little bit. Now that feels nice. Blank looks great. There's that little spot I could feel. It's a little shiny spot. It's probably a spot of CA. So I'm gonna have to work this center section just a little bit harder to get rid of that. Still can feel it. Your finger will tell you if it's still there, because you might not be able to see it, but you sure can feel it. It's still there, and what I think happened there, I think what I'm feeling, I think that's an indention where you can tell I filled it right there, so there must have been a little divot inside of that gum nut, and I think that just drops a tiny bit below the surface. I'm not going to worry a whole lot about it right now. We're going to go ahead and we'll get another piece of 120. We'll sand back and forth to remove these scratches, and we'll go ahead and sand through our grits. That is going to, it's very faint. It's going to fade as we sand, and if we still have it when the pin is done, that's right about where the clip drops. I can drop the clip there, and the rest of the pin will be flawless. I'm going to shut the camera off. We'll finish sanding this, and I'll come back and show it to you right before I go to micromesh. Sanding made the blank look really nice. I'm going to go ahead and micromesh. You can see the area right there where that divot was, and it's darn near gone. It's just a tiny little bit there. And it's hard to feel with your finger when you're doing this. I can only feel it when the lathe is spinning, but it's gotten super small. So let's go ahead now and start micromeshing. The CA glue that I put on the wood end of the blank will also kind of protect it from the micromesh. I got to thinking, before I micromesh this, I probably should go ahead. No, you know what? We're going to go ahead and micromesh because I need to get the scratches out of. This is where it gets kind of tricky. Normally I would sand, finish, and then micromesh. But I've got to remember this is an acrylic blank, so I've got to micromesh this blank to get the scratches out, and then I can cover the entire thing in a layer of CA, and I'll come back and I'll have to micromesh a second time to clean everything up. So we're going to go ahead and micromesh the entire blank. I will come back and show you what it looks like prior to applying my CA finish. Just finished with the micromesh, and you can see the blank looks really amazing. I'm super happy with how it looks. I did have the wood covered with a coat of thin CA, which should have protected it from the moisture, but I think what I'm going to do is pause this video. I'm going to set this blank aside and let it dry overnight. Then I'll come back and apply, I'll clean it with some DNA, and then I'll apply a CA finish to the entire blank and micromesh it again, and we should have a really beautiful blank. It is looking amazing. I'm super happy with how this blank looks. I just finished this pin. I've been working on it. It made it to the lathe twice before. This was the third time, and I finally got it turned down. I'm happy with how it looks. I did put a thin coat of CA prior to sanding to sort of keep it from bleeding, the African blackwood from bleeding into the maple. It did a nice job. It's still got a little bit of a CA coating on it, but I wet sanded with micromesh. Therefore, I'm going to let this set overnight before I come back and I'll clean it with DNA, and then I'll put my several coats of CA finish on it to get it built up, and then we'll micromesh it again, and it should look really nice. This is going to be the top of the pin, the cap end. This down here is going to be the nib end, and I think it's going to be a really amazing looking pin. Giving the pin plenty of time to let the wood dry out, I'm going to go ahead now and clean it thoroughly with some denatured alcohol. We'll start by going with what would be the grain if this were a solid wood blank. I've got a liberal amount of denatured alcohol on here. It's actually rather sloppy, but that's okay because I really want to get in there and clean the pin thoroughly. Okay, I'm just going to let it spin for a couple of minutes so all of that denatured alcohol evaporates. Then we'll come back and, you know, something just occurred to me. I forgot to put this on my turn between center bushings. So I'm going to have to go ahead and swap it to the TBCs, the turn between center finishing bushings. Then we'll wipe it down one more time with the denatured alcohol to get all of our fingerprints off of it. Got the pin remounted between the bushings. Go ahead and wipe it off again. This is just to get the fingerprints off that I got on it while I was moving it. It's not perfectly aligned because, you know, we are actually using non-stick bushings between centers. I could probably align it a little bit better, but it actually won't hurt anything for putting the finish on. We're spinning at the lowest possible RPMs I can set my lathe at. And I'm just going to put a coat of thin CA on the blank. We'll wipe it back and forth, wiping off onto the bushings so we don't leave any blobs at the end of the blank. Now this is thin CA, so it's going to dry pretty quick. You can see how nice the blank already looks. This is a sneak peek of what it's going to look like. I need to apply about 4 more coats of thin, and then we'll start building up the medium. This one may take a little more medium because it looks like, you know, they're potentially between the wood and the acrylic parts, there could be a little bit, maybe some divots in there. So we'll build it up until we have a nice solid layer, and then I'll come back and show it to you right before I begin micromeshing. I just finished up with the CA glue. I think it looks pretty good. It really needs the micromesh just to sort of clean it up a little bit, level it out. So we're going to go ahead and break these bushings off, and then we're going to take it over to our disc sander, square the ends, we'll get it back on some turning bushings, and we'll micromesh it. There's one. See that little fingernail there? There's one on that end. That's what we've got to get rid of. I've cleaned up both ends of the blank. I'm going to slide the non-stick bushings back in, get her back on the lathe, and now we're going to go ahead and micromesh our blank. The trick here is to clean up the surface without overdoing it and removing the thin CA glue finish, because even though we put quite a few coats on there, you know, you can very easily sand through it with the micromesh. Just going to double check our blank. Looks pretty good. I'm going to shut the camera off, and I'm going to go ahead and work through all of the micromesh pads, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes and show you what the blank looks like. It's got a nice little shine to it. I can't wait to get it on the buffing wheels and see what it looks like. Running at about 1250 RPMs. Take a look at how that shined up. That's a good looking blank. I'm ready to assemble this blank into a kit, and I'm going to use my deburring tool on it real quick, just to sort of clean up the inside edge of the tube. You can see the little shavings that come off of that, and basically it just chamfers the inside edge, and what that does is it's going to make it easier for me to start my pin components. I always forget to use that tool. Let me grab my little bottle brush. We're going to clean the inside of that out prior to assembly. Just to make sure everything's out of it. This is going to be the top of the pin, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the clip right down this section here try to kind of center it on the maple, because the maple's not very pretty, and the rest of it, you've got, it's kind of symmetrical. You've got almost a diamond shape in the darker wood, which that's not Paduke. It is, shucks, I'm not 100% sure now, maybe mahogany, and I really like how it looks. So I'm going to try to kind of center this on the back. I've got a bushing here to protect. Let's get this pin press open. I'm going to try to line it up. I'm going to try to get her started. Whoa. Yeah, I'm not going in straight here. There we go. Ah. There we are. Sometimes it's a little tough to get started. Oh, I didn't do too bad though. Looks like that's pretty well centered. Let's take a look at that. Got about that much distance on both sides. I think she's pretty well centered. Rest of the blank looks nice. Let's finish the press. Sometimes getting it started is a little tough. I get a lot of people that say, why don't you mount your pin press? And quite honestly, I don't want to mount my pin press because I like to be able to press anywhere I want to press, whether it's on this side of the garage, the other side of the garage. I also like to take the press with me if I go somewhere to demo or something. So I just don't want to lock myself into having it mounted somewhere. And the reason why it's difficult to press is because I'm pressing from the side. The camera is directly in front of the press, and I'm over to the left of it, so I'm kind of pressing from an angle. It makes it more difficult to start. When I start a pin dead on, straight to the perpendicular with the press, it is so simple, and I never have these issues. But it is what it is, and it's what I do to try to give you guys the best possible instructional videos that I can. Get this kit put together. There we go. That's the second time that's happened. The back half of the transmission where the brass is also unthreads. So I threaded the front half in, and I went to work it a couple times to work the lubricant and get the ink refill moving back and forth, and found out the back half of the pin wasn't threaded in. So always look for that. Make sure it's good and tight, because otherwise someone will go to open or close the pin and they'll untwist the transmission. Let me bring this up to the camera a little bit. Take a look at that. It actually looks really nice. I like how I pressed that right in the center. You got that little symmetrical looking diamond with the walnut on either side. That is beautiful. You know, that might actually be a little piece of red heart with, and that may be the mahogany there. That's beautiful. This was a challenge, but all in all, I think it made for a very nice looking pin. I really hope you enjoyed this video. We faced a lot of challenges to get this pin to this point. However, I think every one of them was worth it, because I think the pin turned out absolutely stunning. I love it. It's a beautiful blank. It's a gorgeous pin, and I couldn't be happier. Now it's even more of a hybrid now with having the wood, the resin, and the embedded objects. So it was a lot of fun to do. Thank you for hanging out with me. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon, and have a great evening.